Hello and welcome to the 2017 HR virtual event, Recalculating the Root with People Analytics. My name is Deanna Caldera with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have a few administrative details to share with you all, and then I will turn things over to our esteemed speakers. First, we would like to thank Deloitte and Workday for their partnership with today's event. They've been wonderful thought leadership partners to Argyle and are committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. So thank you again to Deloitte and Workday. We appreciate you joining us today. For those who are active tweeters, we welcome you to stay connected during today's event on social media by using the hashtag ArgyleHR. Follow us on Twitter at Argyle Exec Forum and join our LinkedIn group, Human Resources HR Forum. I also want to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we've curated based on the feedback we've received over the years from our members. Argyle is very proud and protective of this policy, as it reflects our commitment to ensure the neutrality and overall value of the content presented at our events. We work closely with today's speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. We will send a brief feedback survey to you following the event, and we'd greatly appreciate your feedback as it helps ensure that we're always improving your experience. If you have any immediate feedback, please don't hesitate to reach us at feedback@argyleforum.com. We have a sampling of upcoming HR leadership forums that may be of interest to you. Our 2018 HR events kick off in San Francisco on March 21st. We will also be in New York City and Chicago in May, Toronto and Los Angeles in October, and Dallas next December. So if you're in the area, we would love to have you join us. Finally, and most importantly, please submit any and all questions that come up during today's event into the Q&A section of the interface. Following the panel discussion, we have set time aside for our speakers to weigh in on these questions. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Walt Sokol, Leader, U.S. Workday Practice at Deloitte. We are pleased to have Walt with us to deliver opening remarks. Welcome, Walt. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Deanna, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, folks, depending upon where you're joining us from today. Thank you very much for being here. I'm very excited to talk to you about our human capital trends and specifically the trend around people analytics. So thanks for joining. I will be tying my remarks just briefly up front today to the Deloitte 2017 Human Capital Trends Report, and so this is the 5th year in a row that we've done this report. If you haven't downloaded it yet, I'd invite you to go to our website and download the report. There's some fascinating insights in it. This year we were fortunate to have over 10,000 people respond to our survey for the data that makes up the report. I'm always proud to say that there are a number of business leaders engaged as well. So it's not just HR professionals, but we have an outside-in view from the business as well. From over 140 countries were represented. There was good cross-industry representation in the survey. I would say every industry was covered to some extent. We had large companies, some of the largest companies in the world, and we had companies below 1,000 employees that were represented. And interestingly, when I say good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where people are joining from, we had a really varied geographic participation this year, with 30% of the respondents coming from the Americas, including the U.S., 50% from EMEA, and 20% from Asia. So what I'd like to do before we dive deep into people analytics is walk you through the 10 trends just quickly so you get an overview of what's included. And so the first trend is around the organization of the future. And actually, this is a trend that's been in our report for a few years. I actually spoke about it on an Argyle panel last year. What we continue to see is networks of teams from across the business, so cross-functional teams addressing business issues. So you might pull somebody from HR and somebody from finance and somebody from sales and marketing to tackle a business issue. And org structures are becoming based more on teams than they are on sort of those home departments where people reside. So that's the first trend that we cover. The second is around careers and learning, real time, all the time. So everyone, I'm sure, is aware of this focus now on continuous learning individuals reinventing themselves seemingly every few years, and the need to do that, especially as professionals' careers are lasting longer. So continuous learning is trend 2. The third trend is around talent acquisition, and I would actually say this is tied very tightly to the people analytics trend. Later on, I'll reinforce that recruiting and talent acquisition is the #1 space where people analytics is being employed. So tying social networking, analytics, and cognitive tools to recruiting, very much related to our topic today. Fourth trend is around employee experience, culture, engagement, and beyond. So as Deanna said, I'm a partner in our HR transformation practice, and I focus on implementing HR technology. I will tell you that our methodology is based on persona-based design thinking and crafting the employee's journey to really understand the experience that an employee is going to gather through the implementation of new technology or new HR services. So focusing on employee experience continues to be very hot in the market. Number 5 is performance management. This is a trend that's been growing over the last number of years. Focus on continuous feedback, less focus on ratings, really driving corporate culture change around performance management. We at Deloitte are far along in our journey actually on reinventing performance management. Trend number 6 is around leadership and the disruptions in the market. We're going to talk a little bit about disruptions as it relates to talent analytics, but looking for more nimble leaders who can adapt to these disruptions and lead organizations through them. Trend number 7 is digital HR. Going beyond simply digitizing HR technology, HR platforms, to really digitizing the workplace and changing the way people work and relate to each other at work. So really the digital employee experience and the digital workplace as an effort to drive productivity. Trend number 8 is our trend for today, people analytics. And let me just give you a headline. The headline really is that people analytics is moving from a discipline that traditionally sat within HR with deep analytical experts simply within HR to becoming a cross-functional business discipline, which is focusing on the people components of a company's most challenging business issues. You can see how these tie together because if you think about the organization of the future and the network of teams, you pull a team together and focus on analytics to solve business issues. So cross-functional people analytics. Trend number 9 is around diversity and inclusion. We title it the reality gap. We're focusing on data, transparency, and diversity, but still a significant gap and a ways to go in many companies. And then the last trend this year is around the future of work, the augmented workforce. There's a focus in this trend around robotics, AI, cognitive, and really freeing people up to focus on the things that really require human intervention, interaction, and automating those things that don't. So that's a quick overview of the trends. I hope you find that helpful. And again, I would highly encourage you to go to our website, download the 2017 report. We're currently in the midst of gathering data for the 2018 report, and stay tuned as that will be out early in 2018. So if we dive deeper into people analytics, I want to talk about the survey just a little bit more. 71% of the 10,000 people surveyed said they view people analytics as important or very important within their organization. So that's a pretty heartening statistic. I'm sure people are happy to hear that. Unfortunately, the numbers dip from there, as you can see on the slide. Only 15% have broadly deployed HR and talent scorecards to their line managers. We're going to talk a little bit today about push versus pull. And when I say push, I mean pushing dashboards out to managers. Only 15% of the organizations surveyed have gotten to that point. Only 9% feel they have a good understanding of how talent data can predict business performance. We will talk a little bit about predictive analytics today. And then perhaps most alarmingly, only 8% of the people, and as an HR technology guy, this one scares me, only 8% of the people surveyed have data they feel they can use to do clean analysis. So, but again, I think the good news is 71% are focused on this. As I said earlier, the function is beginning to become more cross-functional across the business. And so while the uptake and the progress is still slow, and by the way, across 5 years, we've continued to comment on how the uptake and progress within the people analytics space has been slow, I think there is hope for the future and that it is now getting the appropriate focus. So I mentioned earlier we would talk about disruptions in the marketplace. This slide might be a bit of an eye chart. Hopefully everybody can see it. I will walk you through it. So we believe at Deloitte that there are major disruptions in both the marketplace and the workplace. Every industry is being disrupted by emerging technologies and other marketplace trends. I spent a few days this week at a large global retailer, and for those of you in that industry, certainly the business disruptions are significant, have been for a number of years, and you can understand how disruption in the marketplace is leading to leadership challenges and the need for more data within the business. At the same time, we believe the workforce is really being disrupted. There are changing demographics, new folks coming into the workforce, different generations in the workforce, and that leads to disruption. Finally, I would say expectations are very different in the workplace. One of the things that we've seen is that as the technology in the marketplace has advanced significantly around productivity, and that people's personal uptake of this new technology and social, et cetera, has been significant, we found that the business uptake has been slower. So people that come into the market having experienced what they've experienced in their personal lives come into the workplace, they have different expectations for what they're going to experience in work. And so these are key business issues that you see across the sort of the top right-hand side of the slide. Managing the changing workforce demographics, developing leaders in the workplace who can manage through these disruptions, focusing on culture and engagement. And by the way, if an organization isn't truly digital and isn't focused on the advances in technology, that can be a real mark on their brand and their culture and really negatively impact them in the market. And then also, as I said, focusing on new organizational models. And really the biggest thing around technology and analytics is the ability to drive productivity and to increase that uptake of business productivity associated with advances in technology. So the top half of this slide is intended to talk about the problems we're facing. So how can people analytics help? Well, here's some of the things that are being addressed on the bottom right of the slide. Let's start talking about talent acquisition and the attraction of new talent. This is one of the areas with the biggest uptake in analytics. There are new tools that look at social data and local hiring data to help companies identify people who are likely to look for new jobs. The number one area identified as a trend around talent analytics. Maybe the other side of that coin is retention. More than 50% of the companies that we surveyed said they actively use social network and external data to help them understand their attrition and retention. They have models they've put in place to solve voluntary turnover and help them take action when their high performers might be beginning to look elsewhere in the market. We talk about development. Think about all the money. We talked about development and learning as one of our 10 trends. Think about all the money being spent on learning programs. But we need tools to assess the effectiveness of those programs. And by the way, those tools are going to require data from outside of HR to understand productivity and understand how development of our people is driving business results. Talk about engagement. Shift from really focusing on HR-driven engagement surveys to business-driven surveys. So how are we engaging across the business? Org design, again, understanding, to go back to that theme of a network of teams, how efficient and effective are those teams being, and finally, what drives productivity. So the problems are real. We believe that the people analytics solutions are also quite real. So let's talk about sort of a maturity model of where people sit, where the people that we surveyed sit. And we'll use this pyramid to do that. If we start at the bottom of the pyramid, you see operational reporting, which is focused, as it says, on efficiency and complying. This typically comes from a single talent system, a single HR system. It occurs at the end of a set period of time and really doesn't provide any insight other than kind of the reported value and possible comparisons against targets that may have been set at the beginning of that period of time. You might take comfort to know that 56% of the organizations that we surveyed say they're operating at this level still. So that's sort of the foundation. You need to have clean data to get there and start to clean your data. but it's really foundational. The next move up the pyramid is to advanced reporting, beginning to be able to drive decision-making based upon benchmarks, trending analyses, and it's really the first opportunity to tie talent to business performance, things like revenue per employee. 24% of the organizations in our survey this year felt they were operating at this level. As we continue to move up, we move to advanced analytics. This is focusing on segmenting the workforce, driving statistical models, aggregating data from multiple systems both within and outside of HR. And the outside of HR is really a key point here. 14% of the organizations that we surveyed felt that they were operating at this level and beginning to understand the attributes of different cohorts and setting hypotheses that they can then use to modify their talent programs based on the results of these advanced analytics. And finally, at the top of the pyramid, we get to predictive analytics. And this is being able to identify risks and develop risk mitigation strategies before the risks occur. 6% of the organizations that were surveyed felt that they were operating at this level. So regardless of where you are, you likely have a lot of company, I guess, unless you're at the top. And so there's room for all of us to grow in this space. So based on that, what I'd like to talk about next is the different flavors of people analytics from sort of a functional perspective. And so if we start with HR service delivery, which is at about 7 o'clock on this wheel, this is really analytics that we've been focusing on a while. This is really people analytics for the sake of HR and not really for the sake of the business, but there is value here in understanding efficiency and optimization within HR and within the service delivery model. If we continue to move clockwise and go to performance and rewards, again, this is a space that's gotten really a lot of attention with a significant focus around comp and benefits, something we've been looking at for years from an analytics standpoint. Then as we continue to move, it becomes a bit rarer to see these things in the marketplace. Workforce planning, we're hearing a lot about workforce planning. You know, you see the bullet there around labor cost optimization. So labor cost optimization is looking at, take a retailer like the retailer I was at this week, looking at a focus on time capture and payroll and thinking about the efficiency of our employees and ensuring that the way they're punching in and punching out and the way we're capturing time isn't allowing for payroll leakage. That's labor cost optimization, and consider that around workforce planning. If we continue to move, we move to recruiting and staffing. I've already talked about this as the #1 focus area for people analytics based upon the survey. And then the bottom two, talent optimization. This is again around leadership development and learning and understanding the efficiency of learning. And it ties nicely, as I said earlier, into culture and engagement, which really will drive your brand as a company in the marketplace. And that's why analytics around this space are so important. So based on that framework, I think probably the question that hopefully you're thinking about at this point is, where should we start? And so this next slide is intended to talk about some of the leading practices that we've seen from organizations that have tackled these challenges. So the first thing, and at this time I'm going to start at 1 o'clock, maybe that makes a bit more sense, 1 o'clock on our clock face here, around leadership. It's important that you invest in a senior leader for people analytics. It requires somebody who's going to be able to interact within the C-suite with the support of the CHRO. They need to not only be analytically inclined and technically inclined, have analytics fluency, but they also need to understand business strategy and the supporting HR strategy. So hire a senior leader to focus on people analytics. The next thing is that you do need to increase analytics fluency throughout the organization. Focus on learning programs that deal with analytics. And as I said earlier, one of the trends we're seeing, one of the best practices we're seeing, is making dashboards more of a push than a pull. Instead of waiting for requests for data, let's push data to managers that we feel will help them to make better business decisions. Well, if we're going to do that, we need to make sure that there's a level of analytics fluency within the organization. So don't miss that step. We talked a little bit about bringing in a senior leader. I think the team structure is important too. There needs to be one leader, at least in the beginning. and one team that's going to own the initial stages of the effort. That team should be cross-functional, and over time it may become decentralized, but it needs to start off with a clear single team structure. The next one, I would assume this is common sense, but you need to develop a roadmap. You're not going to get to the top of that pyramid overnight, so a 2 to 3 year roadmap is really very realistic and makes a lot of sense. You have to have a strategy to integrate data. Again, as you move up the pyramid, by the time you get to the third sliver of that pyramid, maybe even the second, frankly, you need to make sure you're bringing in data from multiple sources beyond just your talent systems. The next one, maybe this should even be higher in the prioritization, is you have to have clean data. Start early. As somebody who's spent over 20 years implementing HR technology systems, I know this is a challenge. Only 8% of the people we surveyed believe they have clean data. This is foundational, and you need to start here. The next thing is to make sure that your analytics are actionable. You need to translate findings into solutions for the business. Things around sales productivity, workforce effectiveness, retention of high potential employees, fraud, accident patterns, other operational things. As you identify these findings through analytics, what are the actions the organization is going to take? And then finally, and maybe I'll stop here, although I am going to quickly cover a case study before we open it up to our panelists. A multidisciplinary team, as I've said throughout my opening remarks here, is crucial. This is no longer an HR function. We need people from across the business who understand strategy and can translate these analytical findings into actionable solutions. And maybe this is a bit biased because I've been a consultant my whole career, but this is really a business consulting function within your organization. So I'll close on this. As I mentioned, or as Deanna mentioned, I lead our Workday practice. I have a case study here that was a Workday client that we've worked with around building people analytics capability. So this was a insurance company. Like 92% of the folks we surveyed, they did not trust their data. They spent a lot of time reconciling data from multiple systems and pulling out things into multiple Excel spreadsheets, different instances of HR technology, and again, spreadsheets that they cobbled together to tell the story. So we started by implementing Workday, including different talent modules, as you can see here, Prism Analytics, Workday Planning, worksheets, scorecarding, and management dashboards. We came up with a comprehensive strategy, which included using the HRIS and using some visualization software as well, and you can see some of the dashboards, albeit very small there on the right-hand side of the screen. And then one of the things that, if I didn't cover thus far, I should have, is establishing a comprehensive governance program to ensure the data stayed clean. This is an organization that's now able to analyze data in these strategic areas. They're able to gain actionable insights and really support the business and talent priorities based on some of what we've accomplished. So that concludes my opening remarks. I hope it sets the tone for a really healthy conversation with our panelists. I'd like to start by thanking our panelists for taking the time to join today. We have with us three different folks. We have Amit Chowdhury from Visa, Jesse Davidson from 21st Century Fox, and Christina Golt from Workday. I will facilitate a conversation, for the next half an hour or so with the three of them. But as Deanna said earlier, I'd encourage you to submit questions into the question part of the portal so that when we get to the top of the hour, we can address your questions as well. So without further ado, let's do some introductions. And Amit, I would throw it to you first to do that.
Thanks, Walt. Just a quick overview of my background, lead workforce planning, analytics, as well as HR operations for Visa. Have been with Visa for almost 3 years and was with HP prior to that, leading workforce planning and analytics there as well. And want to thank Argyle and the team here for inviting me to be part of this panel, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Amit. Jesse, would you like to go next?
Thanks, Walt. As Walt said, I'm Jesse Davidson. I am heading up a people analytics function for 21st Century Fox. I've only been here for about 3 months, so I would say we're early on that journey that Walt alluded to earlier. Previous to that, I was at Covestro, which is a material science company, and Pfizer in New York City.
Yeah, what I think is really fascinating and helpful about Jesse joining us is he's been through this 3 times and can really talk about the comparison across different organizations. And finally, from Workday, we have Christina Gold. Christina?
Thanks, Walt. My name is Christina Gold, and I lead our HCM product management and strategy, so responsible for all the products that really fuel a lot of the information for the people analytics. I've been with Workday going on 8 years now, and definitely am looking forward to this discussion, as I think this really is changing the landscape of how people are using their solutions and driving their business.
Outstanding. Thank you, Christina. It's a pleasure to be with all of you today. So, Amit, I'm going to start with you. One of the things that I talked about was that people analytics obviously is now more focused on a business strategy and business context. So at Visa, how are you focusing on tying people analytics to business strategy?
That's a great question, Walt, and I think this goes back to some of the comments you made earlier in your presentation, specifically around, one, the push versus pull for the data and the dashboards, and second, it's about the consulting function as well. So I think there are 2 key things that work in favor of people analytics and the value it provides at Visa. One is the consulting piece and the infrastructure we have in terms of getting the data out to the line and making sure that we are understanding what the business strategy is, where the business is trying to drive towards, and then understanding which are the critical metrics that help us understand the efficiency against those targets and goals, and then make sure that we are tracking towards that. So just by building the function in a way where we actually have teams and individuals dedicated to business lines of function, we are able to understand that better and make sure we are tailoring our solution to that. The second thing that works in its favor is the fact that talent is very critical for the entire organization from CEO down. So there are key talent and workforce metrics that are part of the CEO dashboard, that are part of every business dashboard and every business goal that is out there. So that makes it easier as well, because then it's not so much so just an HR-specific activity, but it's actually embedded into the business and how it functions and operates on a day-to-day basis.
Amit, you started, you certainly caught my attention when you said push versus pull. Would you say that Visa is at the point now where you're pushing some of these dashboards out to your folks?
Yes. So it's a combination, I think. So there is an infrastructure that we have set up where a lot of this information is available to the folks, maybe not to every individual in the organization, but to most of the key sort of players that have some role in either as a business operations function or in finance, but have some role in terms of managing the operations on a day-to-day basis. And we're pushing the information down to them. And then obviously, as folks go through their activities and have additional needs, there's a significant pull as well. So yes, it's a combination, and we are definitely pushing a lot of information out.
Okay. I definitely want to give Jesse and Christina the opportunity to chime in, and we have a number of other questions. But one of the things maybe you can talk about later if we have more time is, if you are now in this push mode, what is the analytics fluency of the business, and how ready are those folks to accept this data that's being pushed to them? Just a question to hold on to for later, Amit, if we have more time. Jesse, same question for you. How in the 3 different organizations that you've been at, or maybe just focus on 21st Century Fox, wherever you want to take it, how is the people analytics function supporting overall business strategy?
I think that one example that I think of that really talks to the business strategy is really understanding what the business's concerns are, and we've I've always traditionally focused it mainly on the talent portion because we've had other analytics functions that are driving some of the other business-related outcomes, even though I've started to partner more and more with those analytics, as you talked about in your trends. But a key concern, I think, was looking at our workforce. In the U.S., manufacturing is a fairly, I think, diverse workforce, but also more senior, more experienced workforce. So that has a huge risk on how do you keep operations going when you have threats of people leaving because of retirement. So how do we help build scenarios that give business leaders insights of what they can do and give them options? So I think that's a place where I've focused a lot of attention around the people planning analytics portion, because when you have a threat that 20% of your organization potentially could leave within the year, how do we identify what that actual risk is? Because I think they need more clarity on that, and how do we provide something actionable and insightful and provide them like a true risk score around the potential of those people leaving. And that became, we pushed that to them as well, as you were talking about, because yes, I heard that was their ask, but instead of them coming and asking specifically to do that, I heard that was their fear. And then instead of them coming and having fully fleshed out that idea, sometimes like in that consulting practice that you talk about, you have to go out and provide it to them because they don't quite know how to ask for what they want.
I latched onto something you said as well. I think I heard you use the term actionable. When you think about the business leaders to whom you're pushing this data around retention and ensuring that they can retain their top performers, have you seen them take action? Has it been actionable in the business that they've been able to use that data to make different decisions?
It has been actionable by, I think one example was we looked at retirement risks for a certain organization because, as I said, they had a lot of experienced workers. And how can they find ways to ensure that everyone's not leaving on the same day, basically. So they came up with actually an actionable plan to incentivize people to leave in a strategic fashion so they could make sure that they brought people in early enough to train them to be ready to take over those spots instead of all of a sudden now we're 20 people short, we can't actually run the operations of this function. So that's what we actually did from an actionable standpoint.
Yeah, great example of workforce planning analytics. Fantastic. Thanks, Jesse. Christina, I'm gonna go to you next. Part of the trend, and we touched on this, is that analytics changes the culture within a business. People analytics is impacting the business culture and the way the organization uses data to make decisions. There's a cultural change. In your experience at Workday and then also in the marketplace with Workday customers, are you seeing that cultural change? And can you tell me a little bit more about what that looks like?
Yeah, definitely. And Walt, as you mentioned, I have the perspective not only of how we need to use this at Workday and how this is how it really influences our culture in terms of, we're a high growth organization and we absolutely need this data and information to make the right decisions and quickly, right? We need to do that. But also I see this with all of our customers. So I have multiple data points to share here. And really data and harnessing the power of your people data really is driving transformation for many organizations. And it's really where they're trying to get to. As you showed the statistic that, over 70% think that it is very, very important. But they're all on different parts of that journey to get there. The visibility into and the availability of people data is really shifting the business culture. So, for some, it's really more than they've had before. So, how to make it consumable, I think, is really important. But it really is changing a mindset because, as you mentioned earlier, it's no longer just about HR data for HR, right? It is really across your entire business. And it's also no longer really a nice to have. It really is about providing this information to your leaders, to really many levels of your organization so that they can make decisions quickly and effectively and really drive that productivity, as you mentioned from the Deloitte study. Really getting from that full cycle, as you mentioned, knowing your people, knowing what you need to know about them in terms of trends, in terms of movement, headcount, the operational information, to being able to align it with your strategy, to be able to plan for your workforce, and then ultimately optimize, and as you said, including other operational information. So it's not just your people data, but it is a whole slew of information that really is changing how people are thinking about it, and the expectation is that they are making decisions based on data. And it's helping them to make decisions better and faster. And it's a shift across the board, really. If you think about it, it's for individuals providing, and I know people are at different levels of their journey where, Jesse, and I think you mentioned there may not be at the individual level, but I think you need to think about it from an individual level, an individual being able to see, what are things that I can do either in my career, et cetera, so in terms of development and engagement, then getting to managers, where the more managers know about their people and how it's working to drive their business, and then your business leaders, where you think about your CEO having the key metrics that they need to make decisions and make decisions that are actionable. So it really is causing I would say it is a shift in cultures and a shift in mindset, but it is becoming the expectation.
That's really helpful, Christina. As I listened to you, I thought about my own career, and I'm going to kind of go back to something I said earlier. For so many years, we implemented HR technology and HR operational reporting for the sake of HR. And it's so exciting now to be in the marketplace where we can implement these technologies for the sake of the business and changing the culture to really focus on the business when we do these implementations. So thanks very much. I'm going to shift topics in just a second, but before I do, I just want to ask Amit or Jesse, do either of you have anything to add on that culture topic? And if not, I'm happy to move to the next question.
Yeah, this is Amit. Okay. I think Christina covered it well, but I think the key there is definitely the change in mindset, and I'm seeing this across the board within my current organization and saw it in my prior organization as well. And it's a change in mindset that's actually not just within the business, but it's also the change in mindset within HR, specifically where people are getting a lot more comfortable with data and getting a lot more comfortable with the concept that you take decisions based on data. And that's helped tremendously as well as the HR function has gotten more comfortable with that and has gotten more comfortable in having those kind of conversations with the business. It's helped drive that change as well.
Yep, and does speak to that concept of data fluency, data literacy, analytics literacy. Excellent. Okay, I started and ended my little talk with the concept that talent analytics is becoming a function that's spread across the business and not just an HR function. We at Deloitte realize that while that's the trend, it's also still a bit aspirational. Not everybody's there. So Jesse, just because I know you've been in 3 organizations where you focused on this, tell us a little bit about what you've seen in any or all 3 of those as it relates to the structure of this, whether it sticks entirely in HR or whether we've started to branch out.
I will agree that I think that it's still very much aspirational for it branching out to other aspects of the businesses. I know of some companies that have built kind of a strong center of excellence around with multiple analytics kind of groups coming together under one. But I think that's definitely the outlier more than the norm, but definitely I think something powerful in terms of how do you actually get to the insights quicker and actionable because you have all the right people in the room as opposed to playing, telephone and trying to connect through all these different other stakeholders to get to the person you actually need to talk to. In terms of HR, I've seen it structured multiple different ways. A big trend is that centralized COE model where you have the same kind of, the leader and then the kind of main analyst kind of supporting right next to each other in the same location, and they might be supporting different leaders or different arms of the HR function. And then I've seen it also more of a regional approach, so the different regions taking up arms and kind of creating it themselves. And then even a more decentralized model where you might have various businesses saying, we want to build this, and then, maybe that's regional based, but it's in the business itself and it's not actually across HR. I think each of them have their pros and cons. One of the big cons, I think, of having it regional or decentralized is all of a sudden you have people buying different tools, defining things differently, so you can't actually take a kind of a global or a 10,000-foot view of the organization, but you're actually on the ground with the people that can drive action or that are asking the questions. So that's a pro of having it decentralized. So I think a good hybrid model is something that I've seen more and more come through, that where you have a strong center of excellence that's helping kind of define the metrics, the systems, and then you have more decentralized where you actually have people in the business that can take those systems and actually make them insightful to the leaders themselves.
Excellent. Thanks, Jesse. Do either of the other panelists have anything to add on this topic of org structure for this team?
I would add, I'll just add, just from seeing a number of our customers where it truly is still aspirational, where people are getting to this information. But I'm seeing more and more, I think, going back to the question earlier, that the mindset is shifting. So people are looking to make this more foundational. And as they're looking to how are we going to meet, drive our business, how are we going to meet change, they really are, more intentional about making sure that this practice is cross-functional and across different teams, and looking for how they set a foundation in their organizations to do this.
That's right. Thanks, Christina. All right, let's maybe shift over to data. You heard that only 8% of the organizations feel that their data is in good shape to move forward with this type of work. Christina, I'll start with you, given your purview in a software company that focuses on data. How important do you see it in the marketplace for a single source of data, one single version of the truth? What could you say? What could you tell us about that topic?
So I would say that it's critical, right? That I say if the data isn't, trust is the important piece here, right? And if the data isn't trusted, if you're thinking this isn't really going to help me to make the decisions or to align with my strategy, then you're not going to use it to help influence those decisions. Really, the goal is more effective and confident decision-making, informed decisions that drive productivity and value. So the making sure the data is trusted and really coming from that one version of truth is really important. Not, if you're thinking, well, this had to come from all these different places and this might be delayed, this might not be accurate, this, it definitely changes that mindset and doesn't get you to a more confident decision-making process. And it's also about speed. If it's in one place and and I know that it's trusted, then you can make those decisions faster because you're not having to take all this. You mentioned earlier, right, your use case, right, where they were trying to bring information from all these spreadsheets together to make these decisions. If I have one place to go get this information, I can do it quickly, I can do it accurately, and I can trust that the information is correct. It's dynamic. It's fed from what's actually happening in my organization.
Yeah. So Christina, you and I focus on a broad range of customers and clients and focus on cleaning up data, but Amit and Jesse, you're on the front line living it at your organizations. Are you comfortable commenting on the quality of the data that you have? Where are you along that journey? And Jesse, maybe you can talk about multiple places that you've done it.
Yeah, I can definitely say that I like Christina's point about trust. Sometimes we throw in clean data. I'm not necessarily a big fan of that word because clean means that it's not moving, it's kind of static, but as we know, data is constantly changing. So I think trust is a big part in that. Building up trust takes time, and I think there's a power around actually providing data to people to kind of help them create action, right? Because data is HR are stewards of the HR data. So if you want to create a trust in data, you have to really push HR to be accountable for the data. And reporting becomes a powerful tool in that. You can kind of nudge people to make sure that, hey, so that this data is getting seen by more than just you now. That kind of incentivizes people to make sure that they're monitoring their data usage. They're doing entering and cleaning up as they go, as opposed to it's now this kind of huge effort every quarter or every month or every year to go in and have to clean up everything. If it creates that culture of accountability, and that then would then create the culture of trust that you need to be able to do this.
Yeah, I like that. Trust is crucial.
Yeah, and
sorry,
and
was that you, Amit?
Yes, and then just one thing to add, right? I think to the point around trust, from my perspective and what I've seen, it's just so critical to have a robust data set as the foundation, right? If you do not have that, then the value proposition of people analytics goes away, because analytics are only as good and the insights are only as good as they're actionable, and unless you believe the insights, which is based on the data, then you're not going to action it. So I think a lot of the focus, at least in my previous company and current company, initially as we had set up the functions, was around getting that foundational data right, making sure that we had a single source of truth, making sure everybody was aligned on key definitions. And I think to Jesse's point, there's always going to be some sort of ongoing data validation and cleanup. People may not follow the process correctly, or some things change over time, and that's fine. But as long as at least on the core pieces, and if it's not 100%, at least 99% of time, you feel that yes, this data is accurate and this is coming from that source, which is the gold source. That is super critical, and it's on that foundation that you actually build the people analytics function.
And if I could just add, to reiterate, the robustness, the richness really is what makes it valuable. And so having that foundation that is that single source really allows that robustness and richness of data. So we definitely see that and think that is very important.
So gang, while we're talking about data, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the data elephant in the room, which is everything going on around data privacy. Christina, do you have a perspective on that as it relates to this topic and what you're seeing in the market?
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely a very hot topic, if you will, these days. But that's because it's very important, right? And I think this goes back to some of our discussion on, trusting data and having, a single source of truth really allows you to address the data privacy concerns. Regulations change over time. Obviously, in Europe, we have GDPR coming up. Making sure that you know that you have that clean source is important, so that then you can go in and apply the right levels of transparency, because it is about visibility to your data and also the ability to remove that data should you need to do that. So you need the tool sets to do it. You also need to make sure that your data is clean. And, I would say, a number of our customers, they've been thinking about this for a while, and they are making sure that they can access what they need, also provide the right level of visibility when they need to do it. And so you need to have the robust data, but also robust security capabilities in order to do this.
Yeah, security is an excellent point, really, really. Okay. Jesse or Amit, anything on the data privacy front that you can share in terms of what you guys are focusing upon?
Well, I'll jump.
Sorry, Jesse, go ahead.
You go for it.
So I think from our perspective, we are super focused. Being a global organization, we are super focused on making sure that we are aligned from a regulatory perspective with what we need to do on the data privacy front, and a lot of focus currently is around that, especially with GDPR in Europe. So we're working through that.
Yeah, and I'll just piggyback on that, and it's the same thing where I think every organization that's global or within Europe is doing the same kind of exercise. I think that something that I always come back to is when we look to do is the juice worth the squeeze, right? So yes, there's tons of types of analytics and you can do around our data, especially the sensitive data. But is it worth the struggle? So how do you help pinpoint those analytics, those types of methodologies are going to be the most impactful for the business, and go after and fight for that, because you might have some challenges from your internal lawyers, from external regulatory pressures. So if you go after something that you know that's going to bring value, that's the place to focus. Those things that, yes, you would like to have, but might not be as valuable, sometimes you have to be willing to let those go.
Yeah, so prioritization makes a lot of sense. So just to check on time for everybody on the line, we're going to go until the top of the hour with the panel and then open it up for your questions. And so the last category I want to talk about is really lessons learned. We have three folks who obviously have a lot of experience in this space and have been through it multiple times. And so if each could take a few minutes to just summarize some of the key lessons learned. We've probably talked about some of them already, but you can reemphasize them. And Jesse, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Walt. I think we've hit upon a lot, as you said. The single source of truth and creating common definitions. I think those are always important, those foundational pieces. I think from a lesson learned, in my perspective, is while you want to put a lot of energy and effort around that, sometimes thinking bigger in the beginning is not a bad thing. So really starting to think how you can challenge the organization, HR, the business, to think differently, because as we see the business, the biggest struggles that we're already kind of facing across multiple industries, retail and media and finance, if we don't start thinking differently and help support our HR leaders and our business leaders to think differently about how they look at the workforce, that's a missed opportunity. So while I have focused a lot on the foundation, and that's always been something that's critical, you have to focus on that, you still want to make sure you dedicate some of your time to looking at that aspirational. And you don't have to wait till everything's perfect to get to the aspiration. Sometimes you can, find that one project that actually might create value that you can do some work on as well. But definitely prioritizing it, but you don't want to leave it till 3 years out, because 3 years might be too long.
Jesse, I want to come back to a theme from earlier. When you talked about the business thinking differently, it made me think about this concept of data literacy. Have you at any of your stops focused on analytics learning for the business to help them to think differently, or is that still something coming down the pike, you think?
We've done some of that within HR, because I think traditionally that's where we've been a lot of our focus, so creating various avenues for HR to promote their data literacy, whether it's through kind of continuous learning, lunch and learns, kind of meetup sessions within the company, finding other people of interest to kind of build that capability. I've not seen it done across the business at any of the organizations I've been in, beyond just kind of the typical things you see around continuous L&D and specific areas, finance, marketing, things like that.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Jesse. Certainly look forward to hearing you continue to contribute when we open it up to the audience. Amit, at the beginning, you did talk about pushing analytics out to the business, and I think I said I'd come back to that. I would like to just hear your overall take on lessons learned and best practices, but maybe you can also come back to the level of data literacy that you see at Visa, and if you're doing anything to try and enhance that within HR or outside of HR. But really take it wherever you want in terms of lessons learned on it.
Sure. So let me start off with the lessons learned, right? And there's quite a few, but I want to highlight three. And a couple of these we've talked about. But the first big one for me is about the robustness of the foundational data, right? I can't emphasize enough how critical that is, how important it is to make sure that we have a strong data source and a strong foundation around data before we start thinking about the people analytics piece. The second one is making sure that the analytics align to the business, right? What the business needs are, what the business concerns are, what is it that the business is focused on. Because sometimes I find that, we in HR have our priorities and our focus areas, and that's all well and good, but we really need to layer on that, what does the business need, like where are they focused, and how do we bring in workforce analytics, people analytics to support that. So that's a big piece as well. And the third one is more around just making sure that as we sort of think about the high end of analytics, right, which is like, hey, there's a lot of buzz around predictive analytics. There's a lot of buzz around like what you can do from a statistic modeling perspective, and all of that is great. But what I found is there's a tremendous amount of value in terms of just being able to provide basic but like meaningful insights from data, and which is actionable. So it doesn't have to be very high-end in terms of, or very sophisticated, but as long as it's the right insight, it's meaningful, and it's something that the business can action upon, that drives a tremendous amount of value. So, one of the big learnings for me has been like it's as we focus a lot on the high-end analytics, the predictive analytics, we shouldn't lose focus on what you can just do from being just slicing and dicing data and really getting meaningful insights from that, which you can then deliver to the business.
I love that point. I'm a person who likes to try and keep things simple, and what I'm hearing you say is you don't necessarily need to overcomplicate things. Keep it simple and actionable, and it drives value. I think that's great. Christina, you want to bring us home from a lessons learned standpoint?
Yeah, and I'm probably going to reiterate a little of what both Jesse and Amit said here, where, I think one of the important things, and it goes back to maybe keeping it simple or, starting with something that you can deliver, is it needs to be consumable. So going back to that push versus pull, providing those dashboards and scorecards in a manner that provides relevant information to people where they can see it on their mobile device, right? So allowing them to see it where they are so that they can quickly get that information and go on and take action on it, I think is very important. So I think putting it in a process that is consumable, dashboards that are easy. Again, scorecard metrics are key. I mean, our CEO uses our scorecards to run the business. Right, and so again, tying it to your business strategy, I think is the important other important piece there. And I'll say communication is important. I think it's building that fluency muscle is the other piece where, you pointed out earlier that you have to have a roadmap. And I think it is starting with, here are the things that we can deliver today that you can take action on immediately, and then create that longer roadmap as to where you're going to get. And as Amit mentioned, getting to maybe those advanced analytic capabilities where we think about, predictive analytics, using machine learning. And, a key there is that foundation is important to get to that more advanced analytics. So I would say it's a roadmap, but also making sure that it's consumable and people can begin using it so they can see the relevance of how this helps their business.
I really love the point on mobile. I think it's the first time we've mentioned that on the call, and you mentioned your CEO pulling up scorecards. I've seen him do that, and I've seen him do it on his iPad, and that's yep. really powerful when you can deliver these things in a mobile way. Okay, I'm going to turn it back at this point. Once again, I'll thank my three panelists, and I'll do that at the end as well. But I'll turn it back to Diana now to see what questions we've received thus far from the audience, and I'd ask people to continue to bring your questions in, and we'll handle as many as we can. So Diana, over to you.
Thank you, Walt, and thank you for all the panelists and Walt for doing an excellent job moderating. I'm just going to review some of the questions that have been submitted by the audience during the discussion. The first question we received is, what is the best approach for a bottom-down employee to present their analytical approach and questions to executives that may not be considered from the top? So does anybody want to kick things off here?
You're breaking up just slightly. Could you cover that one more time? I want to make sure we all heard it clearly.
Sure, no problem. So the first question is, what is the best approach for a bottom-down employee to present their analytical approach and questions to executives that may not be considered from the top?
Okay. I personally will say I'm struggling a bit to understand the question. I don't know if anyone on the panel wants to jump in. I think what we're asking is, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to just think what I was thinking was, if you're someone, lower in the organization, how do you help raise those questions up and start to try to answer them so that the kind of your executives or your top of the organization will either pay attention or listen? I feel like that was.
Yeah, that's what I heard too, Jesse. Do you have a perspective to share on that?
I mean, I think that I've seen. I think a lot of it is driven by the culture of the organization. Some organizations are very top down, but even in those top down organizations, there are always going to be people that are really interested in learning something new. So if you can find something insightful and you can tell that story in a very really concise, kind of almost elevator pitch way, and you can just find them on their way they're walking to their car or walking out of the building. Sometimes just that brief encounter of, hey, I had this question, I looked into it, and this is what I found. I think that it would be relevant for the business because of this. That approach is to your executives. I mean, if that executive has any good value, they're going to listen, right? Because they're going to see the value in what you're bringing. So you have to be willing to kind of step out of your own self. Sometimes this is not really done through email either, right? Really step out and just kind of go and approach them and talk to them about it. But try to know your story you want to tell before you go, because the story will connect to them easier than here's 25 percentages and math numbers, right? What's the story you want to tell?
Yeah, and I would add two things, and then if Christina or Ahmed have anything to add, that's fine. But I would say business focused, so not for the sake of HR, but for the sake of the business. What's the story you're telling? And then actionable. What are we going to do about it? What would your recommendation be on how we take action on this data?
Yeah, and Walt, I would add, I think, yes, business focus, and, what's the value of this strategy? Like, what can we get from doing this?
Right. Okay.
All right. Perfect. Thank you all. The next question, how can HR analytics best step into the business outcome side without access to business-related data?
Yeah, that's a great challenge, right? And so I think as we talked about that pyramid and moving up the pyramid, you're not going to move very far or too far until you're able to get business data, because tying the talent data to the business data is really the brass ring that we're all reaching for. So it's a challenge. So now all I've done in my response is made it even more challenging. So that's my role as the moderator. Now I'll let the panelists try and solve it.
So I can take a pass at it, right? So I think it's all about going down that path and going down the journey of showing the value. So what I mean by that is you start with the HR analytics, you start with the talent data, and you start to showcase the value and the actions that you can drive just based off of that data, right? And as you build that muscle and as you build that the capability within the organization and also the trust with the business, you'll start to see the question normally evolve, right? So it's like, oh, okay, that's great, but now how about can I look at this and this together? And then it's automatically lends itself to a conversation around, okay, now we need to pull in this information and this information. And a lot of time people, even when they get to that stage, sort of get stumped by system issues or like, hey, it's not all together in one data warehouse today. I think instead, if you approach it by saying, hey, I'll do this offline, and again continue to show the value and the insights that can be driven through that, then you automatically drive the organization to a point where it's just an obvious statement to say, okay, we need to bring this all together. At least that's how I've seen it happen in my experience in the past.
And as I was listening to you, Ahmed, I was thinking about, maybe a tangible example would be learning. So you can figure out, learning spend based on simply talent data, But if you went to a business leader and said, look, this is your learning spend compared to other parts of the organization's learning spend, wouldn't it be great if we could figure out the productivity advances that are being driven by this learning and or the revenue that's being driven by this learning? And I think that's a way to pique people's interest and then just go find that data and pull it in as best as possible. Any other thoughts?
I would add that it is critical to have all of the information. Ultimately, I do think it is a journey, right? You set your roadmap as to here I have my talent, my learning, all of that information together. Now let's layer it on with my operational data so we can understand how that is actually driving the business. So it's having the tools to bring those together to see them in context of each other. So, I think that's a very important piece. And then I think the other layer here is not just operational. It's bringing in that operational information to understand that full context of your business and your people. But the other piece is comparatively to organizations like yourselves, how did they perform in certain key metrics? So benchmarking is the other piece that I think comes into play here.
Yeah, very much so. Deanna, are there any other questions out there?
Yeah, I think we have time for just maybe one more before we wrap things up here. What security protocols, such as NDAs, data masking, et cetera, would you recommend having in place when engaging third-party development partners for building tools using employee-level data? So not sure if anyone wants to take the lead on this one.
Yeah, I mean, from a Deloitte standpoint, I can tell you that, whenever we're working with our clients' talent data, and that's what I do for a living, there are NDAs that are signed as part of our organizational, usually master service agreements. There are extra pieces of content in our statements of work around the protection of privacy of data. So it's something we definitely focus on from a consulting standpoint. But I'll let my fellow colleagues take it from their perspective.
I'll just quickly reiterate from a Workday perspective, it matches yours, Walt, where we have all of these in place, right, because we are working with people's data, other people's data.
Yeah, and I'll say that, I mean, the NDA is, that's just the ticket to entry, right? So depending on where you're doing the data, where the workforce is, you have various legal regulatory challenges that you might have to face. So, for the U.S., you might not have as much around data security or around as the data masking that you would have to do, but it never hurts. So, and sometimes that's also one of the benefits about bringing something in-house and building it in-house is that if you can, then you have less of that risk of the external vendor for certain applications.
Yeah, I would reiterate what Jesse said. I think you have to take into account the global aspect, and depending on the data and the source, et cetera, there could be a lot of different regulations that apply. So one of the things that I found helps is to engage with the legal team pretty early in the process, and they are generally able to guide well in terms of what's needed to make sure that you have the right controls around this.
Absolutely. So, Deanna, I imagine that you have some closing comments, but if I may just quickly, on behalf of Deloitte, I'd like to thank Argyle and Workday, and certainly our three panelists, Amit, Jesse, and Christina, for joining. I hope everyone found value in the conversation. I certainly did. And Deanna, if there are any closing words from you, I'll throw it back to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Walt. So unfortunately, we're out of time, everyone, but I just want to thank everyone for joining us today for this fantastic virtual event. As I mentioned, you'll receive a link to a brief feedback survey about your experience today, and we really appreciate you sharing your candid feedback. You'll also receive a follow-up email with the recording within 48 hours. Thanks again, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.